Places like this aren't made for wheels, a biker sneered, tipping her wheelchair back. 30 minutes later, the diner fell silent as Maureen stepped in. She should eat somewhere else. Places like this aren't made for wheels. The voice cut through the diner like a blade, loud, mocking, and impossible to ignore. 3 bikers in patched leather vests stood near the front, laughing as one leaned over and tipped her wheelchair back, not hard, just enough to send her rolling into the side of a booth. Silverware clattered to the floor. A coffee cup shattered near her feet. She didn't scream. She didn't even speak. But the boy by the window saw everything, and so did his father. Exactly 30 minutes later, a military green SUV rolled up in front of the diner. 3 Marines stepped out, and the entire room fell silent. If you believe respect should never depend on appearances, comment respect to stand with every veteran who's ever been overlooked, and subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories for more stories that honor quiet courage. Grace Torres sat in her usual spot, far left corner of the Rusty Fork Grill, just beneath the clock that always ran 5 minutes slow. It was the kind of place where the coffee burned your tongue, and the vinyl booths creaked if you leaned back too hard. But Grace liked it that way, predictable, simple, safe. She wore her Marine Corps pin on the collar of a faded work shirt and rolled silverware into napkins with the quiet precision of someone trained to assemble rifles under fire. The manager gave her short shifts during lunch rush, nothing too heavy. She never asked for more. She didn't have to. Grace was 45, a former staff sergeant who'd served 2 tours in Fallujah. The last one had taken her left leg and a good chunk of the trust she once had in the world. Her wheelchair squeaked slightly every time she shifted weight, but she preferred it to the prosthetic. It was honest. Her hands, though calloused, moved with a kind of grace you didn't expect from someone who'd seen that much sand, blood, and noise. She kept her routine tight: roll, fold, place, repeat. The quiet helped her breathe, and on most days, that was enough. The customers here rarely bothered her. Some nodded respectfully. Others avoided eye contact, like her missing leg made them uncomfortable. Grace didn't mind. She wasn't here to be noticed, just to keep busy, keep steady. A worn leather wallet sat in the pocket of her flannel coat, containing a single photo, one of her and her unit before the blast. Her smile in that image was wider than any she'd given in years. She hadn't taken it out in a long time, didn't need to until today. Because today, the piece she'd stitched together with quiet corners and second-hand uniforms was about to be ripped open. Will Grace's quiet courage spark a stunning retaliation, or will the bikers get away with their cruelty? Stay tuned on Graceful Valor Stories. The kind of noise that didn't just break silence but spit on it was about to walk through that front door. The door slammed open with the kind of force that rattled the ketchup bottles on the counter. 3 men stepped in: boots, heavy jackets, loud leather vests patched with names like Tank, Goose, and Blade. Their laughter hit first rough, sharp, the kind meant to claim space whether it was given or not. Grace didn't flinch, but she felt it, a shift. The air thickened, like right before a dust storm. Tank was the ringleader: broad shoulders, sunburnt neck, and a permanent sneer that made everything sound like a threat. He spotted Grace almost immediately. "Well, look what we got here," he grinned, nudging his buddies. "Someone roll in from the VA?" Goose chuckled. "Nah, that's Combat Barbie. Bet she's just here for the sympathy tips." Grace didn't rise to it. She kept folding napkins, setting each one down with calm care. She'd heard worse: in war zones, insults didn't land the same. But in diners like this, where people looked away instead of standing up, they had a different kind of weight. Blade sat down at the counter, pounding the bell for service. "Hey, we getting menus, or just staring at the help?" Grace wheeled herself over, posture steady. "Would you gentlemen like today's special?" she asked, voice flat but controlled. "Sure thing, soldier girl," Tank smirked. "Roll it over." His voice carried too loud for the size of the room, on purpose. "Funny they let people like you serve food," Goose added. "Ain't that against some kind of health code?" A couple in the corner stirred, then went still. The waitress behind the register glanced up, then immediately busied herself wiping a spotless sugar dispenser. Grace didn't respond. She simply placed the menus down one at a time: knife, fork, napkin, measured, controlled. Don't they have kitchens for you back at the VA? Tank muttered, just loud enough. Grace rolled away. From the booth behind them, someone snorted. Blade leaned back and stretched his legs wide, taking more space than needed. Maybe she's here for combat training, he grinned. Lesson 1, How to Ignore Your Betters. The first crack had formed in the piece. The second one was coming fast. Grace made her way toward the coffee station, steady hands reaching for a fresh pot. Her wheelchair bumped softly against the counter as she poured, her focus tight, her breathing controlled. Behind her, the laughter rose again. Tank had something new to say, he always did. You know what I never got? He called. Why they started letting women into combat. Just slows everyone down. Goose chimed in, she probably sat behind a desk, typing reports and calling it war. Grace didn't turn around. She didn't have to. The next moment did it for her. Blade stood up suddenly and followed her, moving like he'd been dared to. You deaf, soldier girl? He slurred. We're talking to you. Grace glanced over her shoulder, not in fear, but calculation. Blade was bigger than her, but sloppy, the kind of threat you don't engage unless forced to. He stepped closer, then grabbed the handles of her wheelchair, no warning, no permission. Before Grace could react, he yanked the chair forward with a violent jerk. The front wheel clipped the leg of a nearby table. The tray flew from her lap, hot coffee splashed against her arm, a fork skittered across the floor. And then came the sound Grace hadn't heard in years, her own body hitting the ground. Hard. Her right leg twisted underneath her, the prosthetic bent awkwardly. Pain lanced through her hip as the metal pressed into bone. The diner went dead silent. A busboy froze mid-step. The waitress behind the counter gasped but didn't move. A couple near the window stared into their drinks. No one stood up. No one said a word. Blade laughed, so did Tank and Goose. It wasn't loud now, it was meaner, quieter, satisfied. On the floor, Grace lay still, her hands pressed against sticky tile. Coffee soaked into her jeans. Her wallet had spilled open nearby, and from it slipped a folded, faded photograph, her unit years ago, standing proud in the desert sun. Someone had written on the back in permanent marker, "She carried us every damn time." Grace didn't cry, but the silence in that diner had never felt heavier. Grace pushed herself up slowly, not because she was weak, but because the moment demanded it. Her hands moved with trained precision, her jaw locked, her breath steady. No one helped her. The laughter had faded now. The bikers leaned back like they owned the room. Tank muttered something under his breath about government handouts, but no one even responded. Grace reached for her chair, uprighted with one firm motion, and climbed back into it like she had 100 times before. Her face didn't flinch, but her uniform, her jeans, her shirt, her Marine Corps pin were soaked in coffee in silence. A crumpled napkin brushed past her wheel. She didn't even bother to wipe the stain. At the front window, a boy around 9 sat frozen in his seat, wide-eyed. He hadn't blinked in a while. "Dad," he whispered, "is that lady a soldier?" His father turned to look, a middle-aged man in a weathered ball cap, his jacket lined with old campaign patches, fog, Desert Storm, 2nd Marine Division. He didn't answer right away. He looked at Grace, at her steady hands, her clenched jaw, her wet sleeves, and at the photo on the floor beside her, the one with the word carried scrolled on the back. Finally, he said, "Yeah, Tommy, she's a real one." Then he stood up calmly, quietly, walked toward the door, and pulled out his phone. Outside, the light had turned gold. The town lay quiet in its afternoon lull. The man stood on the gravel beside his pickup and brought the phone to his ear. "Yeah," he said, "this is Sergeant Daniels. I need to report something." "No, not official, personal, civilian ground, but it concerns one of ours." He paused. "You're going to want to send a team. Trust me." Inside, Grace sat still at her corner table, adjusting the sleeve of her flannel shirt. Her hands moved over her lap like they were brushing off dust, but they lingered at her chest just long enough to press against her heart. She didn't know it yet, but they were already on the way. 30 minutes passed. The bikers had grown louder, more relaxed, like nothing had happened. Tank waved for a refill. Goose played with a butter knife. Blade leaned back in his chair and propped his boots on the table, his laughter rising again whenever someone dared to look his way. Grace stayed in her corner. She didn't speak. She didn't serve. Her posture was upright, hands folded neatly, like she was bracing against something invisible. The photo had been returned to her wallet, but her uniform still carried the stains. Then it started with the sound of tires on gravel, the kind of sound that didn't belong to a regular car. Outside the diner, a military green SUV rolled up slowly, dust curling around its wheels. The Marine Corps insignia gleamed on the side panel. It parked directly in front of the entrance, engine idling, quiet, but commanding. Inside the diner, the noise stopped. The door swung open with military precision. 3 Marines stepped in. They didn't say a word, they didn't have to. The first was a master sergeant, barrel-chested and gray-haired, walking with a slight limp and a polished cane in hand. His eyes swept the room like he was checking a perimeter. Behind him came a younger Marine, tall, clean-cut, pushing an empty wheelchair. The third was a female captain, her uniform adorned with a row of ribbons and combat medals that shimmered under the fluorescent lights. Her presence alone shifted the air, the silence in the room thickened. Even the waitress stopped mid-step, her tray tilting slightly. The bikers froze. Goose slowly dropped his knife. Tank blinked, like he didn't understand what was happening. Grace didn't move until the master sergeant stopped directly in front of her table. He stood tall, squared his shoulders despite the limp, and offered a textbook salute. "Staff Sergeant Torres," he said, his voice gravel and steel, "forgive our delay." Grace's body responded before her mind could catch up. She returned the salute, sharp and steady, and for the first time that day, her eyes sparked not with fear, but with something that had been missing for years: recognition, respect. The diner held its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. The 3 Marines stood like statues, uniforms crisp, boots unmuddied by the dirt of the world outside. The kind of presence that didn't ask for silence, it commanded it. The female captain stepped forward, eyes fixed on Grace. Her tone was calm, but every syllable landed with authority. "We received a call from one of ours." He said a decorated Marine had been publicly harassed on civilian ground. She let her gaze shift slowly, deliberately. It landed on the corner booth, on Tank, on Goose, on Blade. The laughter was gone now. Tank's jaw clenched. Goose looked down. Blade shifted in his seat, suddenly too aware of how loud he'd been just minutes before. The captain's voice remained level, and that physical assault was involved. Grace shook her head slightly. "It's nothing," she murmured, but the words didn't carry. The master sergeant did not flinch. "With respect, Staff Sergeant, it is not nothing," he replied, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "Nobody touches one of ours, not in combat, not in peace, not ever." The younger Marine stepped forward, eyes locked on the bikers. "Staff Sergeant Torres led our unit through Fallujah. She pulled 3 men out of a Humvee after it was hit. I was one of them." Grace looked up, recognition dawning. "Private Jenkins," she said, voice soft. "Corporal now, ma'am," he nodded. "Thanks to you." At the counter, a sound. The boy from earlier, Tommy, stood up slowly. His father stood beside him. A subtle nod passed between them. Then, across the room, an elderly man in a Korean war cap rose to his feet, no words, just a silent salute. A woman near the door followed, then 2 National Guard members in civilian clothes. Within seconds, half the diner was standing, backs straight, shoulders squared, a wall of quiet, dignified solidarity. Goose sank into his booth. Tank looked away. Even Blade didn't speak. For the first time since they walked in, the bikers didn't own the room. Grace did, without raising her voice, without leaving her chair. A week passed. The sign out front was no longer the same. The rusty old metal that once read Rusty Fork Grill had been replaced with a wooden board, freshly painted in deep navy blue, Homefront Cafe, where respect is always on the menu. Inside, the changes were quiet but unmistakable. The back wall now held a framed display of local veterans' photos, unit names, service years, some in dress blues, some in worn fatigues, all of them staring forward like reminders of what sacrifice looked like. The table where the bikers once sat stayed empty, not because anyone banned them, but because no one wanted to sit there, not anymore. Grace still came in every afternoon, still folded napkins, still moved with the same quiet precision. But now her Marine Corps pin was no longer tucked beneath her collar, she wore it out in the open, and taped to the back of her wheelchair was a small American flag patch, faded but proud. Customers stopped to greet her now. Some offered thanks, others simply nodded, eyes lingering on the plaque above her booth, reserved for those who served. All gave some gave more. Dave, the manager who once froze behind the counter, had changed too. He wore a pressed shirt now, a tie with a small flag pin clipped near the collar. He hired 2 more veterans that week, one in the kitchen, another for weekend shifts. Melissa, the young waitress, asked Grace about military ranks between tables. She now recognized the difference between staff sergeant stripes and captain bars. She even knew which questions not to ask, lessons Grace taught her gently. The Marines came back every Thursday at 1800 hours sharp, the same green SUV pulled into the lot. Sergeant Wilson, Captain Rodriguez, Corporal Jenkins, they sat at Grace's table without formality, without speeches. They just shared coffee, silence, and memory. What had started as a single moment of cruelty had become something larger, a diner reborn, a town reminded, a woman no longer invisible. Grace didn't smile much. But when she did, like she did now, listening to Jenkins tell some half-true story from Fallujah, it reached all the way to her eyes. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the Montana hills, the door to Homefront Cafe opened again. A young man stepped in, barely out of high school, stiff in a new army uniform. His cap was clutched tightly in both hands, his eyes wide and unsure. He stood there, like he wasn't sure if he belonged. Grace noticed him immediately. She wheeled herself forward without hesitation, her flag patch catching the warm glow of the setting sun through the diner windows. "First deployment?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Shipping out tomorrow morning, ma'am." She gestured to the empty chair at her table. "Sit down. Coffee's decent. Company's better." He hesitated. I wouldn't want to intrude." "You're not intruding, soldier," she said with a calm smile. "You're continuing a tradition." As he settled in, Sergeant Wilson raised his cup, no words, just a silent toast. Around the diner, veterans lifted their mugs, some with hands that trembled slightly, others with postures still sharp from years of discipline. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The message was clear: you are seen, you are one of us, you'll never stand alone. Since that day, the town had changed. Grace had been invited to speak at the local high school. She told the students what the uniform meant: not war, not glory, but discipline, purpose, carrying others when they can't walk themselves. Business owners started offering discounts to veterans without being asked. A small memorial had been approved for the town square, a black stone with simple words carved in silver: to those who served with dignity and those who stood with them. Jack and the bikers never returned. Rumors said Jack lost his job, something about a video, something about public conduct. Grace never asked. She had more important things to focus on, like the young female recruit who now came for coffee every Sunday, asking about basic training, or the Vietnam vet who finally wore his medals again after 40 years. Outside, the SUV waited in the fading light. A note taped to the window read, "We always come back for those who never quit." And inside, surrounded by silence, coffee, and kin, Grace Torres finally felt home. If you believe no veteran should ever stand alone, comment, respect, and share their story with Graceful Valor Stories.